Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Linda Streisguth with the Kitsap County League of Women Voters. Today is the first in a series of webinars hosted by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the League. Our topic today is how to be a better ally, and I'll be interviewing Tracy Flood, President of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP's, Unit number 1134 in Bremerton-Kitsap County. The League of Women Voters was founded over 100 years ago in the days of the women's suffrage movement. We envision a democracy where everyone has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. We are nonpartisan, but are always working on vital issues of concern to the members of the public. The League welcomes both men and women to join our membership. Embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion is core to the League's mission to empower voters and defend democracy. The League of Women Voters of Kitsap formed a DEI committee several years ago to engage more with diverse communities in Kitsap County and to sponsor both League member and community education programs about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. In May 2020, the League of Women Voters of the United States issued a statement speaking against racism. Part of that statement reads, and I quote, "An organization whose mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, as an organization whose mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, we stand in solidarity with all Black communities. The League shall do so not only by speaking out against racism in all forms, but by doing the work required of us to be anti-racist. We are committed to listening to and amplifying Black voices and educating ourselves and our children on the historic and ongoing systemic racism that plagues this country. The League acknowledges painfully that America is a nation founded on racism. Therefore, all who live in this country must contribute to and participate in organizations actively working to achieve full liberation and inclusive freedom. We must all advocate for anti-racist policies at every level of government. Finally, we echo the call of our partners at the NAACP. We must all vote in November. The road to change lies at the ballot box," unquote. Today's webinar interview is the first in a planned series of webinars to get to know the diverse communities in Kitsap County. In light of recent events in the United States and the League of Women Voters' statement against racism, it is particularly appropriate that we begin this series with a conversation with Tracy Flood, President of the NAACP Bremerton Chapter, Unit 1134. Tracy S. Flood is current president, as I said, of Unit 1134, and we'll ask her to explain the geographic reach of that when we get into our conversation. She is also the owner of her own law practice. She specializes in elder law and is an experienced trial attorney in criminal law and family law, with 20 years experience as an attorney in Washington State. Her experience includes 8 years with the U.S. Department of Labor and the Social Security Administration. Tracy worked for the Office of Administrative Hearings in Olympia as a pro tem judge, in Kitsap County as a district court pro tem judge, and as a specialized examiner adjudicator for the U.S. Department of Labor. She continues to serve as a pro tem judge in King County. Tracy served 3 years on the Washington State Bar Association Board of Governors as an at-large governor, where she served on numerous committees and boards. She was elected to the Family Law Executive Committee for the Family Law section of the WSBA, president of the Pierce County Minority Bar Association, and chair of the Civil Rights Committee. Tracy is past co-chair of Kitsap County Human Rights Commission and a current member. She serves on the Council for Public Legal Education and in January completed Summit 2 with U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Tracy is on the Olympic College Foundation Board, the WSBA's Client Protection Board, Vice President of the WSBA's Foundation Board, Lauren Miller Bar Association's Executive Board, and a founding member of the Polka Dot Powerhouse. She's a founding member of the Kitsap Women's Giving Circle as well. Tracy was president-elect of the Kitsap County YWCA and president of the Kitsap County chapter of Washington Women Lawyers for 2 years. Tracy has received recognition as a Rising Star, Madison's Who's Who, and Seattle University School of Law Black Law Students Award, Washington Women Lawyer 2013 President's Award, and the Lauren Miller Bar Association Social Justice Award. She is a 2018 YWCA Woman of Achievement, and originally from Chicago, she came to Kitsap County, Washington, while serving on active duty in the United States Navy. Tracy is a busy lady, and we are delighted that she's here to join us today. Our questions come from members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And with that, I think we can get started. So Tracy, why don't you tell us a little bit about Unit 1134 and your responsibilities as president of that organization?
Well, I'm going to start a little bit with the history of the national organization because we are a branch that is under a national organization. And as you stated, like the League of Women Voters, we are nonpartisan. So we do not speak to issues where partisan things arise. We allow for educational opportunities, but we do support and push forth initiatives that to the ballot that need to be put forth in our communities. So as president of the Unit 1134, the Bremerton-Kitsap branch, branches make up the majority of our national office, which the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization, founded in 1909. And it was founded in response to ongoing violence against Black people around the country. And with that action to move forward to address civil rights issues as a national civil rights organization, currently we have a little bit over 2,200 units and branches across the nation. We are one of those. A part of our branch would be a youth unit. The youth unit is encompassed and independent of the adult branch, but they are uniquely linked in the order of leadership. We cover Jefferson County as well as Mason counties because we're on the peninsula and those areas do not have branches. So if there's an issue that arises in Jefferson County, we would receive that information from our national or our state area conference. So then we're linked also by regions. We fall under Region 1, Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. So it's almost like elected maps, you know, regions in 26th district, all of those things, but on a regional area. But we fall up under, as far as hierarchy, under the state area conference of Alaska, Oregon, Washington. So when it comes to things on a state level, our state area conference, Alaska, Oregon, Washington, covers those things. If there's ever issues that arise that require filing of any lawsuits or things of that nature, that our national office organization would authorize that to happen. So everything comes through our national office as to what our mission is and what our goals are, and currently what our movements are as far as things that we put out in the media and things that we do on what would be considered campaigns and things that are currently in the area of right now focus on voting. We're focusing on what happens, our campaign of We're Done Dying. So those are different movements that come under what our objectives and our missions are.
Right.
Okay.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about your primary responsibilities and activities? And I'm wondering if your mission or focus has changed in the last year as a result of the Black Lives Matter movement and public activism.
So no, because Black Lives Matter movement, as many say, that was formally organized in 2015. And that was formally organized by the parents of 3 slain Black young men. The NAACP has been around again since 1909. Black Lives Matter is not new. Many people will look at it as, well, there's this new movement, but it's not, because a movement is when you're looking for people to change things. You're looking to change a position. The civil rights movement has always been looking to change the movement of how people look at Black lives. That's always been at the forefront of everything that's transpired in history from before the civil rights movement. When you looked at going back to the Civil War and going back to the Emancipation Proclamation, when you go back to all of those things being relevant, it's always been about Black lives. And do they matter? So as the president of our unit, my job is to carry out our overall mission. And our mission is tied to our national office. It's to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and to ensure the health and well-being of all persons. That's our core mission. And when you look at that, it's always required for involvement in our communities as a whole for that to be accomplished. So our mission hasn't changed. Our focus hasn't changed.
It is said that we'll repeat history if we don't know and understand it. And you spoke a bit in your last response about that history. Here's my question. Do you believe society does not understand the history of our country or the way in which that history has contributed to the racial inequities we're observing today?
I believe that our history has been whitewashed. What's being taught in the classrooms, what people believe to be history, what has happened as far as what's limited to a textbook is this, you focus on Dr. King, he had a speech. Many young people who don't know history kind of see him as this phenomenon, like, but not understanding how the civil rights movement was organized, how the NAACP recruited Rosa Parks to be in the bus boycotts, to be able to understand that everything that happened as far as the marches all of that was planned. All of that came with having an action, having a goal of where we're trying to be, where we want to be. So when you don't have that history, you don't understand the significance of why your vote is political currency. You don't understand that people died. Medgar Evers died. President of the NAACP in Mississippi died because of this work. So it's not just Martin Luther King. There are so many that are a part of this movement that didn't just happen around George Floyd. What happened with George Floyd is that people saw 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But prior to that, when Dr. King went to Memphis and you had the sanitation workers with the signs that said, "I am a man." If you don't understand that, then yes, you will think that this just came about because of George Floyd. Now, this doesn't take away what's happened with the George Floyd murder. This elevates it. This has brought it to an even greater level than what we had during the 60s with the civil rights movement. But it's all a continuum. And understanding before the civil rights movement, the history and the significant role that African Americans played in the Civil War. And so when you say in the War of 1800s, 1865, understanding the Civil War, the North and the South. And if you don't understand how things were built into currency and your value came in how many slaves you owned, how much land you owned, the significance and the effect that it has on the African American community today. That is just a continual history. That until we can get to a place where we stop saying, "Oh, she's the first African American to sit on the Supreme Court here in the state of Washington. Oh, she's the first to be elected in King County." Until we can get there, we don't understand the significance of the role of the Black culture. I think I answered your question.
You did. Yes, thank you. Our topic today is titled "How to Be a Better Ally." And one of the first steps to becoming an ally is to raise our awareness of these issues and problems. And for some of us to develop a new lens that enhances our understanding. How can we as individuals become more aware of our biases going forward?
So going back to the title, how to be a better ally. Let's just break this down a little bit. In order to be an ally, you have to be willing to act, willing to act for others and with others. And your end goal or your goal should be to end the oppression and to create equality. That's just kind of a textbook kind of definition there. So if first you start there, and you have to say to yourself, am I willing to do this? Because that requires action, not words, but action. Active steps being taken to accomplish that goal. So when we think about what is it that we can do, and I'm going to put it in the context of community. Our Kitsap County community is about 6%, give or take, African American. Overall, our population is spread out between North and South Kitsap. You don't find very many areas where you see big groups of people of color housed together. We're all spread out in different neighborhoods. There may be some areas more than others, and that's the current status. But that wasn't always the status. You have Loxie Egan's Way, where there was a significant number of African Americans during the time when people moved here to work at the shipyard and the Navy and a lot of things that moved the population in. When we think about allies, it's movement. It requires an action. So to be able to say, how do we act and what can we do? Educating yourself is probably the biggest thing that one can do. In this day and age of media, fast paced, everything's online, let's Google what Google got to say. Google is Google. But I grew up in a time where I had the card catalog, hardbound books, research, nothing like going to the University of Washington and being in an old guard library, just those things. Now, it takes a lot more energy, it takes a lot more time to make sure that the information that's coming across your screen is correct. So these are all things educating ourselves. That's the primary, is educating oneself in ways that you don't just believe first blush. It's as one saying goes, trust but verify. Not fact check, trust but verify. So that's really a key. It's education first, educating oneself, learning about organizations that are in the area that are committed to some of the things that you believe in and your principles is key also. Because there's so many people that believe, even today, well, the NAACP is only for Black people. No, I read the mission. Again, the end of it says, well-being of all persons. We're civil rights organizations, and civil rights can be violated on many different levels. One of the key things that people need to understand that is when it comes to the area of civil rights, the majority of the people that are disenfranchised and taken advantage of and mistreated are people of color. So that's how it was established. Because of the ongoing violence in 1909 around the mistreatment of Black people. So when we fast forward into today, enough is a mantra. is where you have to stop and say, we need to deal with this, because history keeps and will keep repeating itself if we don't.
Good thoughts. You spoke about education, and I want to dig a little deeper into that. I am wondering if you have, well, first of all, if you think some of the recent books that talk about institutional racism can help with that education. And if so, is there a particular title or even documentary or resource materials that you would recommend for our members that want to take that step of becoming better educated about these issues?
So there are some standard things that I think is being passed around in a lot of different organizations about white fragility and things of that nature. But I went to the card catalog for a reason, because I'm kind of I like things that are that have been around and are seasoned, because they are always relevant. So one of the things, and I have here, is Black Robes and White Justice, and that's by Bruce Wright. I'm tongue-tied here. This is a great book that I would recommend. Also, The Alchemy of Race and Rights by Patricia Williams. It's a law professor. It's kind of from the standard of a diary of a law professor. As far as videos, Dr. Bryant Marks from Morehouse College. There's lots of quick videos, 10, 15 minutes that he has done. And he actually was here in Kitsap County last December and did a training with law enforcement here. I attended that for law enforcement, as well as I want to say some county, city of Bremerton employees attended that training. But he has videos available on this subject matter of implicit and unconscious bias. Very powerful videos. Some things that aren't standard. The YWCA did a 21-day challenge that's still available. You can click on those links. There's articles there. There's videos there. There's recordings of some of the workshops that were done, the Lunch and Learn series that are very powerful. And then there's, can't really see that. Let's see. Nope, can't really see that. I'll read it. Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? A national bestseller. Very powerful book. And I will end with one of the books that when I was a part of the, I was on the Board of Governors and serving on the Board of Governors. During my time there, we did a task force on racial bias in the criminal justice system. At the time, it was Judge Gonzalez, who's now a Supreme Court justice, and Robert Chang, a professor out of Seattle U, as well as professors at the University of Washington. And we did research because it dealt with a time when there had arisen some issues, comments being made by judicial officials that were based in clear racism. And we, at that time, did provide the new Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorism by Michelle Alexander. We provided this book as a resource during that time. So there's so many materials out there that can take you beyond what you're seeing just on social media. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to share more resources.
Those are some wonderful suggestions, and I see in our chat we've had a couple people ask for the list of those, and so we will provide those. We do have someone in the background that is kind of keeping us organized today, and I think that we'll be able to provide that list probably in the chat section of this webinar. So thank you, Tracy. Those are some great ideas. I also just kind of glanced down at my clock, and I see that we've been talking for nearly an hour, and so we have quite a number of questions to get to. And so we're going to just continue on with that. So my next question would be, how would you like all of our communities with different cultures and ethnicities to work together to fight systemic injustice against Black people?
So in order to work together, that's a great question. A great question. In working together as a community, we have to all, again, be willing to do the work, willing to put in the work. And the work isn't just saying to someone, oh, I want to support, but then it's left there. Supporting the communities here in Kitsap and around the US includes not only commitment, but financial commitment. Because we're all nonprofits. The Y is nonprofit. The NAACP is nonprofit. When you look at how organizations are done, they are built on memberships. So that's one part of a way that you can commit. Become a member. Become a member of the NAACP. We could use the help. And there's lots of work to be done. So and one of the things that if you become a member, you can become a part of is we do programming. The programming includes one that's coming up this Sunday. We have a youth panel that we're doing. Our main speaker is our, again, first Black Supreme Court woman justice in the state of Washington, G. Helen Whitener. And she's going to engage in conversation with our youth between the ages of 14 and 25 on voting and beyond. And it's so important to hear their voice. So that's a part of the programming. That's action. We're giving our youth a safe place to have a conversation, and we're introducing them to a person who's in a position of power and influence that they may not even understand what her job is. So they're having that opportunity to engage and ask questions and voice their concerns. In addition to programming that I just mentioned, the youth panel, for the last 4 years, this would be the 5th in December, we've held a community law enforcement dinner in partnership with OC, Olympic College, and the Fireside Bistro. And that's where our membership has been able to engage with our law enforcement officers in a safe place to have a conversation, real conversations with the police chiefs, our state patrol, our law enforcement with the tribe, very diverse group, but in a conversation over dinner, expressing similar concerns and concerns that law enforcement would not be able to know otherwise. Being a part of this setting, conversations where For the first time, some officers said, well, I have a son, and African-American father says, every time my son leaves the home, I'm afraid that he will not return. I have to have a conversation with him when he's driving about law enforcement. And that's real conversation, real fears, real concerns. But ultimately, everyone in that room wanted the same thing. And that's to be able to go to work and to come home to their families safely, to be able to live in their homes peacefully, to be able to be in their communities peacefully. So without those conversations, you're going to think that you don't have anything in common with them. They're just law enforcement. Or those are just people of color. So engaging with organizations like with the NAACP can help break down stereotypes, break down barriers in so many ways. And we provide so many different opportunities for conversations, for relationship building, for community building.
Excellent. There's a belief in the United States that hard work and effort can provide equal opportunities for all people. How can allies help unpack that narrative and provide the stories that allow others to recognize that not all people are provided equal opportunities in our nation?
Equal opportunities. It's a nice way of summing up. If you have privilege, you have opportunities. If you have access to certain things, you have opportunities. The child with the single mom who's working 2 and 3 jobs to put food on the table, all 3 jobs minimum wage, does that equal opportunity? Or is that just that mom working hard? There is a need to understand and acknowledge that equal opportunity isn't equity. That as long as there is pushback to looking beyond the test score as a factor, to looking at life experience, looking at diversity on applications, there's no equal opportunity. There has to be a commitment in the boardrooms, in the classrooms, in the courtrooms, in the federal government, in the state government, and the city government. Healthcare. There has to be a commitment to understanding the culture, the need for diversity at the table, the need for diversity in all of these areas so that there can be real equality and equity. And until that's recognized, you will continue to see 1, maybe 2 faces of people of color in these areas. Government, our city, our county, our state government has to be willing to make the commitment to diversify its workforce. They have to be willing to make the commitment to recruitment, to ensuring that when they put out a job announcement, that it gets to the diverse communities, that they look at the totality of the experience.
How can allies amplify the stories of historically underrepresented populations who have experienced social injustice? Some examples you just provided, so that more people can understand why it's so important.
Allies come and play a very vital part because you have to recognize the need. And when you recognize the need and you have the knowledge and you have the access where you see the need, you can help open that door. You have to be willing to say and to, it's almost demand that there's change in organizations where you have not seen it before. And the significance now is the conversations are happening more than you've seen in the past. But there has to be a true commitment to action. It's almost a call to action. We will act on this. We will come up with a strategic plan for our board, for our volunteer group, for our whatever organization it is. And I named several things in the boardrooms, in the courtrooms. We here in Kitsap County can't be satisfied with, well, years ago we had one African American clerk. There are so many areas where there is so much talent. But if you don't reach out, you don't extend the hand to say you're welcome, you have to be more welcoming. If people feel that they're going to be isolated and alone, they're going to go look at the employers outside of Kitsap County where there's more people that look like them, where they don't feel alone and isolated. So there's a lot of work to be done. And it goes back to one of my original comments in the beginning. We have to get beyond the first. We have to get beyond that. We have to be able to say, we did some active recruitment, and now we have board diversity. We've got 2 women of color, 1 African American male, Asian American community, Hispanic community, all of the underrepresented populations. In order to be a community that is receptive to ending systemic racism.
I want to ask a bit more specific question about the employment and recruitment piece that you just talked about. Because we often hear the employment pool specifically for public sector jobs, such as police departments, county municipal governments, don't often include people of color and specifically African Americans. How can we change that, or what are some steps that the league might be able to engage in that helps that situation?
On the city government and level and the county government level, I think that the league has a very good opportunity to make some breakthrough in the area of policy. And policy, when it comes to county government and city government, is about hiring practices. Taking a look at the county and the cities and saying, what are your hiring practices? Share that with us. Mm-hmm. And being able to suggest, why do you do it this way? And what are your true commitments to diversity? And not taking from our electeds. Well, our HR person handles that. Mm-hmm. The League of Women Voters can definitely help in that area. So I think that it's committing to holding our government and our electeds accountable in their commitments beyond lip service. And that's really an important role to be able to play. But also being open to asking the hard questions, getting the stats, asking what are their true employment figures. So it's accountability. The NAACP and the League of Women Voters can hold our government and electeds accountable. Beyond the accountability, which is a very big piece, is on the federal level, there is a sense of veterans, so a different type of way of doing things, but putting together opportunities for employers on all levels to talk to young people while they're still in high school. And even get them together in the 7th and 8th grade. Because if you can talk to them about being a police officer at an early age, you can then introduce them to police officers. You can then introduce them to the pipe fitter in the shipyard. You can introduce them to the professor. So for a number of years, I did career day at Cedar Heights Junior High in Port Orchard. I'm an avid mentor at Bremerton High School. But those are just a few programs. But one of the things I remember in being at Cedar Heights is how many 7th and 8th graders really were excited that I was a lawyer and a person of color and someone that they could relate to. So while we're in this pandemic and everything is virtual, there are still opportunities to introduce our young people to professionals. And part of the panel that we're doing at the NAACP for the Meeting the Justice is introducing them to someone they would not otherwise meet in normal conditions. But the League of Women Voters is also able to connect with the YWCA for moot, when they do the moot court, when they have the different options, and promoting those opportunities as well. So there's a lot of little community things that can be done. But I think the biggest thing and the biggest call to action is to hold those electeds and county officials accountable to their commitment to diversity, and really finding out what's really happening there and making policy recommendation changes.
Excellent. I want to switch gears a little bit to current events.
Okay.
And the national NAACP has talked about the triple pandemic that we're currently facing, referring to the combined impacts of the health pandemic, the economic impacts of that pandemic, and then systematic racism. What are your thoughts on how allies and people of color can come together to overcome this triple pandemic? And I'm wondering if you have any specific examples of the effects of that triple pandemic in our own community.
So on a national level, our focus areas are, I was going to say trifold, sixfold. And they include federal advocacy, education, economic opportunity, criminal justice, health, environmental, and climate justice. Our environmental and climate justice are together. So when you look at how things have been made of even more an emergent nature when it comes to those issues because of the pandemic, we know that on a national level, people of color, African Americans, have been so adversely affected by the COVID, and so many numbers on a national level. And that's can be linked to pre-existing conditions. Access to affordable health care. And when we look at things on a local level, the whole challenge behind Harrison Hospital, which is now St. Michael's. Harrison Hospital being in Bremerton, being accessible, being on a bus route. Versus Harrison Hospital, St. Michael's, being in Silverdale. Accessibility to affordable health care. That's a major, major issue for people of color, for people that are in vulnerable positions, our vulnerable adults, our elderly population, those that rely upon the public transportation to get to the doctors, those that rely on its walking distance, those that unfortunately, because of affordable health care, we're being seen in the emergency room for their needs. How, the impact is great. The need to be able to factor in a capitalistic society that not everybody believes all profits is good profits, because when you're profiting at the expense of people of color, you're profiting at the expense of our most vulnerable populations, it eventually comes at a cost that's greater than what is seen, but mainly it's hidden because it affects those that have been historically disadvantaged. Many of the neighborhood clinics in major cities like Chicago, Seattle, where you used to have the clinic doctor, the community clinic, where you could go get your care, doors were shuttered. Many of the centers for children to go play were shuttered. So, and I'll weave something in here. When people talk about mental health issues and there being the sales tax that's set aside to help the mental health issues and the changes because of funding cuts, but the issue and the conversation around police funding, how do you deal with that? How do you factor in weighing the community needs, but also the need for law enforcement? The NAACP does not advocate and has not said defund. As president of the Bremerton branch, it's important to be able to understand the needs in both areas and how do we find the balance between our community needs and our needs for our law enforcement agencies to be funded adequately. That requires for everyone to come to the table. That requires for conversations to be had. It requires a commitment to listening, not accusing, but listening and learning. Because we are one community. And if we don't begin to listen and learn, we'll go back to what you said, history will repeat itself.
You spoke a bit about law enforcement, and I want to dig a little deeper into that topic. Research has found that Black communities are policed much more frequently than white communities, and that persons of darker skin have been stopped by police much more frequently than persons with lighter skin. I'm wondering what you have observed in our own community, and then more broadly, what suggestions you have for addressing those policies, I guess I will call them, where they exist in police departments?
Well, we began a conversation after George, I will go back a little further than that. When Bremerton Police Chief Steve Stratton was the police chief, we had many conversations, I believe, starting around it's about 2015. I may have my years mixed up, so don't quote me on that. But we did an article, a joint article, and it was an article to bring together two communities, one the law enforcement community and one the community of color, to introduce them to basically him as the police chief and me as the president of the NAACP, but giving some history and background so that people could understand who we were and what we were trying to do, which was build a coalition to work together collaboratively. And when George Floyd happened, I did a press release. And in that press release, I made some demands. I put forth some challenges. After I did that, I took some action. That action included inviting them all to a conversation. And the purpose of that was to begin the dialogue around what happened with George Floyd, but also to be proactive, not reactive. I could have just did my press release reacting, but I took it one step further and chose to be proactive and to say, hey, let's sit down, let's talk about this. Where can we make changes in Kitsap County, and what are you committed to doing? That one conversation wasn't going to solve everything, but that one conversation did allow for some commitments to be made and some accountability to come, which is coming as follow-up to my press release, as well as the commitment to transparency by law enforcement, to talk about excessive use of force, to talk about what their training modules include, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what they are taught, what they're not taught. And language, and what's used as language, and the importance that that has. But as a follow-up to that conversation, I asked every law enforcement agency, all the police chiefs, the sheriffs, all who were present, to commit to following up in conversation. And our first follow-up conversation is going to be at the end of the month, starting with our police chief from Port Orchard, Chief Brown. And the follow-up includes their commitment to citizens review boards. If they have an advisory board, what have they done since June? So they've been given some time. And so that connection with law enforcement, that accountability piece is important. And I think I veered off your question a little bit, but
well, it's a very good discussion, and it certainly is. It's wonderful to hear that conversation is happening, that dialogue is happening. And I would just say, if there is a role for the League of Women Voters, if there's a way for citizens to get involved in that, to support that, we would welcome that. Your thoughts on that.
Yes, I will be putting out a call for participation
Wonderful.
and follow up. But the intent is to follow up with each police chief, our sheriff, and we are also still looking to do a virtual form of our community dinner that we have held in person in the Fireside Bistro. So we are looking to still have that conversation, because the important thing to remember is law enforcement officers are people.
Mhm.
There is no such thing as a blue life. They're human beings.
Mhm.
There's one race, the human race.
Mhm.
We are all people. And the conversations we've been able to build up over the years, to not be able to engage in that conversation during this time would bring gaps that aren't needed. Because of our commitment to our community, we're going to make that happen in a virtual way.
Excellent. The League of Women Voters has positions on many public issues in Washington state and lobbies actively in many areas. In the area of criminal justice, what specific reforms do you think would be most effective in reducing racial discrimination? And is that part of the conversation that you are already having in the venue you just described?
Yes, we do talk about reforms in different conversations, and I've had different conversations with our state patrol representative for our area, as well as Steve Drayton, who is the director of police chiefs and sheriffs down in Olympia now, who was formerly the Bremerton police chiefs here. So I could continue to work in the area of policy and advising. And I've met with police chiefs outside of the Kitsap County area. So when you really look at reform and how you think about things, there's been so many initiatives that have been put forward. There's and I'm going to draw a blank on what the Congress put forth. We received a brief update from Congressman Kilmer on some things that have been put forth. And but here's truly the thing. We can talk policy, we can talk change, we can talk, okay, let's remove their budget. Let's, there's different conversations happen in different areas of the US. But ultimately, again, it's about relationships. It truly is. It's about relationships between law enforcement and the communities in which they work. There was a push in many different areas to have law enforcement live where they work so that people could know them. There's been different programs established over the years. But here's another fun fact. Our prison population, and to compared to our population and what's happening on the national level, and the increase from 1970s to the current, as far as the number of people in prison, the financing, the money that's made off of private prisons is an issue. But that's full circle. That not only encompasses law enforcement, that encompasses who's a prosecutor, who's the judge. So the justice system as a whole plays a role in how the Black male and Black female are looked at and treated. If you're criminalized based on the color of your skin, and that's rhetorical because you we're a target. If you're a new police officer, you're young, you're being trained. And you have this implicit bias in your mind that I'm dealing with an African American male who's 6'2". Your adrenaline's rushing. Is the thought he's dangerous immediately before even assessing the situation? And I say that in reference to everything that's happened. The incident with George Floyd was about a $20 bill. Breonna Taylor died in her bed. Her boyfriend was licensed legally to have the weapon that he had. He wasn't seen as protecting his home. You have the incident of the two people standing outside of their homes with their guns drawn when the protesters were going by. An African American person couldn't do that. You have locally where our young people went out and protested in Port Orchard, in Bremerton, in Bainbridge, in Posbo, and in Silverdale, where the sheriffs had the streets blocked for the young people to be able to walk in a certain area. So all of these protests were discussed in advance with law enforcement. But you have a business owner who came out with a taser because he was afraid. Let that have been a Black person. The reality is, before you hear my resume, before you know that I'm the NAACP president, before you know that I'm a lawyer, you see my skin color first. We don't say that there's white on white crime. We talk about Black on Black crime. Why? When statistics show that it's known that people who look like you are usually the people who commit crimes against you. So the suburban mom, suburban family, you see it with the 17-year-old who traveled across state lines with an illegal weapon, who is being praised for killing and shooting protesters because he went to protect property that didn't belong to him. How do we deal with these things on a national level? We deal with them in a very divided way because of current leadership. And the division is growing wider and wider.
Let me flip that question a little bit and say, how do we deal with that on our local level?
And again, that goes back to
That
relationships. Yes,
politics are local.
that goes back to relationships on a local level.
Mhm.
Because I gave the example of the business owner coming out with the taser and young people and the indication there. Law enforcement wrote it up, investigated. It goes from law enforcement to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutor has the ultimate decision to charge. So locally, we have to be proactive. We have to vote. We have to look at holding every individual in these positions accountable.
This has been such a great conversation, and I have a couple more questions I want to ask, and I'm hoping our audience can stick with us for a few more minutes. I want to touch a little bit on policy. You referenced policy in your last response, and you talked a little about the healthcare system locally and some aspects that you're concerned about. My question is, what do you see as the greatest racial injustice with healthcare, with housing? We know historically zoning laws played a major role in housing inequities.
Mhm.
And how can we advocate for changes in those policies that will truly affect change?
Good question. I actually was just having a conversation yesterday with our Bremerton Housing Authority interim director about housing here in Kitsap. So healthcare, that's a really big issue, as well as housing. So I can't put more weight on one than the other because they are intertwined. And here's why. If a person has a medical bill because of the lack of affordable health care, that medical bill can cause them to become homeless. That medical bill can also be put in collections so that when they go to seek housing, it's on their credit. So it prevents them from being able to get new housing or affordable housing or a house. Because now it's linked to your credit. But if you can't get your medicine that you need to survive, rent, medicine, it's all intertwined. The systemic issues that exist in a level where they're not singular. They're linked to housing, employment, affordable housing, a living wage, healthcare, but all I have is part-time jobs. They're all linked. They're linked so much so that there's barriers all along the way. And then you can tie it into the criminal justice system or the justice system, even on the civil side. Let's say you have some mental health issues. You got sentenced. Now you have some criminal history, affordable housing, employment, all barriers. Let's just say you had some issues, you went through a divorce. Now you have your children. You're now one income. Child Protective Services got involved. You're charged with neglect because you had to leave the kids. You couldn't afford the daycare. Now you lose your housing because you no longer have your kids if you were on a voucher. It begins to be a cycle. Once you're in the system, there's so many legal financial obligations that come up. Granted, we're making progress in that area, but still there's things that ultimately begin a cycle of financial detriment. I could go on, but there's adverse effects in all of those areas that are devastating to communities of color. And they all carry a weight that are linked. And even more significant is the fact that there are some healthcare providers that don't understand treating different cultures. There are so many things that go misdiagnosed. There are so many women dying in childbirth. There are so many African American women that have issues during childbirth. But understanding and being able to advocate for yourself in the doctor's office so that they listen to you and they don't just brush you off as I'm the expert and you're not. Systemic issues.
We kind of began our discussion talking about education, and I'm switching gears a little bit here, and as we are looking to kind of conclude this deep discussion we've had this afternoon. I'm thinking about the next generation, and I'm thinking about our local school districts. And I'm wondering, is there anything we can do to encourage our local school districts in a way that increases awareness of systemic racism that you've just been speaking about? That might result in creating anti-racism behavior patterns. You know, thinking about changing that cycle, that compounding cycle, and how the next generation or a younger generation views our world. I'm also wondering if you think we've made any progress in achieving more justice in our education system through affirmative action and quotas. And so that was a big mouthful. There were three
and there's only 3 minutes left. But what I will do is try to give you an overall big picture of what we've done locally concerning schools in our state. About maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a conversation with our state superintendent. And prior to that, we sent 2 letters to him, letting him know that we were concerned about schools. And we were really concerned when we heard from some of our students in the Bremerton School District that they, for the first time, not being in the schools, were in a way okay with that because they didn't experience the racism, the bullying that was happening.
Mm.
And that was heartbreaking to hear. So we had this conversation with our state superintendent, not only on the issues of virtual learning access, but about bullying, about what children are experiencing in the classrooms at the schools that's not being talked about. So our goal will be, again, accountability. We've placed you on notice that this is an issue. And how are you going to deal with it? So if it's happening in the Kitsap County community, you know it's happening across the state. So how are you going to deal with it, State Superintendent? So we've offered ourselves to work collaboratively with the State Superintendent as well as locally on these issues so that children do feel safe in schools, that they aren't being bullied, but even more so, that the teachers have the training that they need to not brush it off as kids will be kids. Because everyone has a role to play. There's accountability and responsibility on all of those levels. So that's what we're committed to.
Thank you. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and the frank discussion today. I do want to give you the opportunity to provide any closing thoughts that you would like to leave us with before we do close. And so I'll just ask that. Closing thoughts, last words.
Last words. So I will say to those who are committed to being allies, know that the time for action is now. We have to take the momentum that we have and that we've seen on a national level and utilize that momentum. Accountability is so key, and the League of Women Voters can make even more of a difference in our community than what has taken place so far. But to be more active, to be able to say, the time is now to be able to make diversity a good word, not a bad word. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Again, it has been my pleasure to be hosting this interview. And Tracy, I want to thank you for your time, for your thoughtful comments. Thank you to the audience who joined us today via Zoom. And my thanks to the League members for organizing this discussion and providing the questions today.
Thank you.
This was the first in a series of webinars presented by the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the League of Women Voters. The next webinar will be in November and will be a panel discussion on desegregating white privilege with Karen Vargas, founder of Kitsap Equity, Race, and Community Engagement, as well as other social justice advocates. I hope that you'll be able to join us. Thank you again. It was my pleasure. And Tracy, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.